I came to Rio for 10 days. That was the plan. 10 days, a nice hotel in Ipanema, see the city I had been hearing about my whole life, but never had time to visit. Then fly home to Boston, figure out what retirement actually looks like for a guy who spent 40 years working and never really thought about what came after. I never booked the return flight. My name is Frank Caruso. I'm 68 years old. I grew up in East Boston, the son of a bricklayer, and I spent 40 years building things. Houses, small commercial buildings, the occasional renovation that turned into something bigger than anyone planned. I started the company at 26 with a truck, a crew of 3 guys, and a line of credit that made me nervous every single month for the first 5 years. By the time I sold it, we had 22 employees and a reputation in the South Shore that I was genuinely proud of. Not famous, not large, but solid. Every building we put up, I knew it would still be standing in 50 years. That mattered to me. It was the thing I cared about most in the work. Not the money, though the money was the point, but the permanence. You build something right, it outlasts you. There is a satisfaction in that I could never quite explain to anyone who hadn't felt it. My wife Teresa died in 2019. 26 years of marriage, 2 kids, a house in Winthrop with a view of the harbor that she loved more than anywhere else she had ever been. Breast cancer. She was 61 years old. She was the kind of woman who organized everything around her. The house, the family, the social life we had built over 3 decades. With a quiet competence that you don't fully understand until it's gone and you look around and realize you have no idea how any of it actually worked. I sold the business in 2021. The offer came from a larger contractor out of Providence who had been watching us for 2 years, and when he made the offer it was fair, and I was tired, and Teresa had been gone for 2 years, and I looked at the company, at the trucks, the equipment, the schedule board in the office, and I thought, I built this for us, and us is gone now, so I sold it. After everything, the sale, the savings, Teresa's life insurance, the house, I had $360,000. I am not a man who knows what to do with money that isn't working. For 40 years, every dollar I had was either in the business, or in the house, or in the kids' education. Money sitting in an account doing nothing felt wrong to me, like a crew standing around waiting for instructions. I knew I needed to figure out what came next. I just didn't know what that was. My son Marco suggested the trip. He said, "Dad, you haven't gone anywhere in 3 years. Go somewhere. Anywhere. Just go." He said it the way you say things to a parent who you're worried about but don't know how to help. Directly, because gentler approaches haven't worked. I picked Rio de Janeiro because I had a friend from the business, a tile supplier named Rodrigo, who was originally from Rio, who had talked about it for 20 years with the specific passion of someone who left a place they loved and has never stopped missing it. He described the city the way you describe a person, not the sights, not the beaches, but the feeling of it, the noise and the warmth and the way people there exist in public space without apologizing for taking up room. I booked 10 days, a hotel 2 blocks from Ipanema Beach, business class because Marco said, "Dad, you spent 40 years in a truck. You can afford business class." He was right. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2022. The heat hit me when I walked out of the airport. Not unpleasant, just immediate and total, the way Brazilian heat is, like the city is letting you know right away that things are going to be different here. I got to the hotel, dropped my bags, and walked to the beach because it was 4 in the afternoon and I had nowhere to be and nothing to decide, which was a feeling I had not had in 40 years of running a business. Ipanema Beach at 4 in the afternoon is a specific and extraordinary thing. I stood at the edge of the sand and looked at the water and the mountains behind the city and the people, the density and variety of people, every age and type, all of them there for the same simple reason. And I thought, Rodrigo was right. This place is something else. So, I met Camila on the 2nd day. I was at a beach kiosk, one of the small bars right on the sand, having a cold beer and trying to order something to eat with the Portuguese I did not have. The woman at the kiosk and I were in the middle of a negotiation conducted entirely in gestures when someone beside me said, in English, "She's asking if you want it with or without onions." I said, "Without? Definitely without." She laughed and translated. Then she looked at me and said, "American?" I said, "Boston." She said, "I have a cousin in Newark. Does that count?" I said, "Close enough." Her name was Camila, 34 years old, born and raised in Rio, worked in events management for a hotel in Leblon. She had the specific ease of a person who is comfortable in their own city, not showing it off, just inhabiting it, the way you inhabit a place you have known your whole life. Her English was excellent, which she said was from years of working with international clients, and from a period she spent in Miami at 22, that she described as educational, in ways that had nothing to do with the English. We talked for 2 hours at that kiosk. She told me about the city, not the tourist version, but the real one, which neighborhoods were worth knowing, which markets you had to go to on Saturday, which viewpoint above Santa Teresa gave you the best angle on the bay at sunset, better than anything the guidebooks mentioned because the guidebooks didn't know about it. I told her about Boston, about the business, about Teresa. She listened to the Teresa part with the full, quiet attention of someone who understands that grief is not a topic to be moved past quickly. She asked one question when I finished. How long ago? I said, 3 years. She nodded. Then she said, and this is your first trip since? I said, first trip anywhere in about 5 years, actually. She looked at me and said, then Rio came at the right time. I did not know, in that moment, how many ways that sentence would turn out to be true. We exchanged numbers because she offered to show me the viewpoint she had mentioned, the one above Santa Teresa. I assumed it was a polite offer, the kind you make to a tourist you meet on the beach and don't expect to hear from again. She texted me the next morning with a time and an address. We spent that afternoon on the hill above the city, looking at the bay, and she told me things about Rio that you cannot find in any book, the history of the neighborhood, the people who had lived there, the small facts of a city that only make sense if someone who loves it explains them to you. I had never been shown a city by someone who genuinely loved it before. It is a completely different experience from being a tourist. By the end of that week, I had extended my stay by 10 days. By the end of those 10 days, I had found a furnished apartment to rent monthly in Ipanema, 3 blocks from the beach. I called Marco and told him I wasn't coming home yet. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dad, is there a woman involved? I said, I met someone. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm not ready to leave. He said, okay. He said it carefully, the way he says things when he's worried but has decided that worry is not his call to make. Call me every week. That was all he asked. Camila and I were together every day for the next 3 months. She showed me the city piece by piece, the fish market in Gloria on Saturday mornings, the samba clubs in Lapa on Friday nights, the specific bakery in Leblon where the pastries were worth making a detour for. She introduced me to her friends, her colleagues, the rhythms of a life being lived in a city she was entirely at home in. She never asked me for anything in those first months. I want to say that clearly, because it matters to the story. She paid for her own dinners. She insisted on it, even when I tried to cover the check. She said, Frank, I'm not that kind of woman. I want you to know that. I believed her. I had no reason not to believe her, and I wanted to believe her, and both of those things together are a combination that a man my age, in my situation, should understand is dangerous. I did not understand it. Not yet. Her brother Lucas appeared in June, 4 months after I arrived. Lucas was everything Camila was not. She was warm, easy, unhurried. He was sharp, fast-talking, the kind of man who fills a room immediately and then immediately starts working the room. He was 38 years old, and he had the energy of someone who is always in the middle of something important, always between one meeting and the next, always with a phone in his hand, showing you something you needed to see. He was also, I would learn 14 months later, not her brother. But in June of 2022, sitting at a restaurant in Ipanema that Camila had chosen, and that Lucas had arrived at 20 minutes late with the untroubled lateness of someone who considers punctuality optional, he was her brother, and he was charming, and he had a business proposition that he presented over 2 hours and 1 bottle of wine with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. Chat, import business, electronics from Asia, phones, tablets, accessories, brought into Brazil through a contact Lucas had in São Paulo who handled the customs documentation. The margins were significant because the contact had a relationship with a bonded warehouse that allowed them to move product faster than the standard import timeline. Lucas had been doing it for 3 years on a small scale. He had an opportunity to scale it significantly, but needed capital. He was not asking me to invest that night. He was explaining the business to Camila, who had mentioned it to me once in passing, and I was there, and he was explaining it. That was how it was presented. Not a pitch, a conversation. I asked a few questions. He had answers for all of them, specific and plausible, the kind of answers that make you feel the person has thought seriously about the thing they are describing. I drove home and told myself I was not going to invest in anything I had not researched carefully and independently. I had built a business from nothing. I knew how real businesses worked. I was not going to hand money to a man I had met once over a bottle of wine. 3 weeks later, I wired $20,000 to the account Lucas provided. I want to explain how that happened because I think it matters. It didn't happen because Lucas pressured me. He didn't. After that dinner, Camila mentioned the business once more. Said Lucas had found another investor and was close to having what he needed. Said it with the specific tone of someone passing along information rather than making a case, that was all. No urgency, no second pitch. No, I invested because I had spent 40 years knowing how to evaluate a business proposition, and this one had seemed, on the surface, credible. I invested because the return he had quoted, 12% over 90 days, was plausible for import arbitrage if the logistics were genuinely as efficient as he described. And I invested because I was 68 years old, and in love with a woman who had spent 4 months never asking me for a single thing, and I wanted, somewhere beneath all the rational analysis, to be useful to her world. 93 days later, $22,400 appeared in my account. 12% exactly as quoted. Plus a message from Lucas. First return. More where that came from if you want to scale up. I called Marco and told him I had made an investment in Brazil that had just returned 12% in 90 days. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Dad, that sounds too good." I said I had researched it and it was legitimate. He said, "Okay, be careful." I wired $60,000 the following week. Those 90 days were the best period of my time in Rio. Camila and I took a trip to Buzios, a coastal town 2 hours from the city, quiet and beautiful, the kind of place where you eat fresh fish on a terrace above the water, and the only decision you have to make all day is whether to walk left or right along the beach. We talked about the future for the first time on that trip. Not specifically, not with plans, but in the general direction of a future. What it might look like, where it might be. She said, "I don't need you to stay in Rio forever, but I need to know you're not going to disappear." I said, "I'm not going anywhere." I meant it. I had $62,000 working in Lucas's business, and a woman I was in love with, and an apartment in Ipanema, and nothing in Boston that needed me back. I was not going anywhere. The second return came on day 91. $67,200, 12% again, plus a small bonus Lucas described as a volume adjustment. He called me that evening and said, "Frank, you see what this can do. If you want to move serious capital, the next cycle is the time to do it. I have a container coming in from Shenzhen in October. The biggest one I've done. I need $200,000 to cover it. Return will be the same. Maybe better." I did not wire $200,000. I wired $180,000. I told myself it was because I was being conservative, keeping $80,000 back, being careful, the way Marco had told me to be. In reality, $180,000 was not conservative. It was nearly half of everything I had. But the 2 previous returns had been exact and on time, and I had verified the bank account, and I had looked up the customs company Lucas mentioned, and found a registration that matched. And I had decided that the evidence was sufficient. The evidence was fabricated. The bank account was real, but emptied within hours of each wire. The customs company registration was a shell filed by someone Lucas paid to file it. The returns I had received were my own money, recycled back to me to build trust. This is how these things work. I know that now. I did not know it then. October passed, November. The 90 days came and went. On day 97, I texted Lucas asking for a status update. He replied the following day. "Delay at customs. The São Paulo contact was dealing with a regulatory issue. Nothing serious. 2 more weeks." I told Camila. She said, "Lucas is always dealing with something. He'll sort it out." 2 weeks later, I texted again. A different answer this time. The container had been held pending an inspection, a new development in the regulations. His contact was working on it. I called instead of texting. He answered on the third try, his voice slightly different. Still confident, but a different kind of confident. The confidence of someone who is performing confidence rather than feeling it. He said, "Frank, I need you to trust me on this. There's a complication, but it's temporary." I said, "Lucas, I need a timeline." He gave me one. 2 weeks. He was certain. 2 weeks later, his number went straight to voicemail. I went to Camilla's apartment that evening. I had a key. She had given it to me 2 months earlier with the casual ease of someone making a practical decision. I knocked first. No answer. I used the key. The apartment was not empty the way Isabella's had been. I had heard about a story like that. A man in Santa Teresa, and I understood now what he must have felt. Camilla's apartment had furniture. It had her things in it. But Camilla was not in it, and she did not come home that night. And when I called her phone, it rang 4 times, and then a message told me the number was no longer in service. I sat in her apartment until midnight. I don't know why. Possibly because leaving felt like accepting something I was not ready to accept. Possibly because I kept thinking she would come through the door with an explanation that would make the previous 6 hours make sense. She did not come through the door. I lost $360,000, $20,000 in the first cycle, which came back, $60,000 in the second, which came back, $180,000 in the third, which did not, and the $100,000 I had kept back, the money I had thought of as my safety margin, my evidence of being careful. I spent most of that in the 4 months after, trying to find them. Lawyers. 2 of them. A private investigator recommended by the first lawyer. Fees, translations, a trip to Sao Paulo to follow up on a lead that went nowhere. The investigation confirmed what the police had told me in the first week. The names were false, the identities untraceable, the accounts closed. There were 3 other victims they knew of. There were probably more they didn't. I called Marco from the police station. I told him what had happened. He listened to all of it without interrupting, which is not characteristic of him. He is a man who interrupts, who processes out loud, who asks questions as they occur to him. His silence during that call told me more about how serious it was than anything he said afterward. What he said afterward was, "Dad, come home." I said, "I don't know if I can." He said, "What do you mean you can't?" I said, "I mean, I don't know what home looks like right now. I sold the business. The house in Winthrop is gone. Your mother is gone. I came here with everything I had built and I lost it. And I don't know what going back means when there's nothing to go back to." He was quiet again. Then he said, "You have us, Dad. Me and Lucia and the kids. So I know that. I have always known that. But there is a difference between knowing you have people and knowing what to do next. And in that moment, I did not know what to do next. I still don't, entirely. I am 68 years old. I have a small apartment in Flamengo now, cheaper than Ipanema, quieter. A neighborhood of working people going about their lives with no particular interest in tourists or retired American contractors. The landlord is a retired teacher who charges me a fair rent and leaves me alone, which is what I need right now. I think about the second day. The beach kiosk, the woman beside me who said she had a cousin in Newark. The 2 hours of conversation that felt, in the moment, like the most natural thing in the world. I think about Bucios, the terrace above the water, the fresh fish, the conversation about the future. I don't know how much of it was real. That is the thing I cannot resolve. I know the business was false. I know Lucas was not her brother. I know the mechanics of what was done to me. What I don't know, what I have spent 8 months trying to understand and have not been able to, is where the performance ended and the person began. Maybe there was no person. Maybe it was performance all the way down. That is the simpler explanation and probably the more accurate one. But I keep coming back to Buzios, to the way she said, "I need to know you're not going to disappear." I was the one who stayed. She was the one who disappeared. 40 years I spent building things that would outlast me. Things I could stand in front of and say, "I made that. It will be here when I'm gone." That was what I was proudest of. The permanence. Nothing about this is permanent. Nothing about this will outlast me. But I am still here, in Flamengo, in a small apartment, with a landlord who leaves me alone and a city outside my window that does not know or care what happened to me. I'm working on deciding if that's enough. Most days I think it might be.